Hello, everybody. Welcome back to BBB Sharing. This is Joshua, and today I have a very special guest. I'm going to let him introduce himself.
My name is Phillip Hamilton. I am the owner of Hamilton Legal Services, LLC. I work as a paralegal, as a court runner, but essentially, as, helping law firms with various jobs they need done, including stakeouts, foreclosure sales, which are held in front of courthouses at the county circuit courts. So I act as an auctioneer and as a witness to residential properties that are being foreclosed off. And I serve like child support papers, petitions for divorce, small claims, large claims, civil, and protection orders, and subpoenas for doctors for medical records, to UVA Health, the Centra, and other hospital networks, chiropractor offices, you name it. And there's a lot to the job, and I have over 10 contractors that work under me, and we cover Virginia, Maryland, DC, and North Carolina.
Sounds like a little bit of everything. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So in your industry that you see, do you go after or what is a paralegal?
Well, if you look at the history of paralegals, it actually hasn't been around that long. It actually started in the 1970s, and with the rise of corporate law firms, because since the 1800s we've had legal secretaries that have worked under attorneys, and before the 1800s, attorneys pretty much worked on their own without secretaries in America. So, but with the expansion of these corporate law firms, secretaries couldn't take on all the jobs that are necessary for these corporate law firms. So then you had the rise of paralegals, and they do a lot of things like intake, drafting of legal memorandums and other documents, intake like interviewing clients to determine whether they're eligible to be represented by their client or not. And they do a lot of the footwork for the attorneys. And I got a paralegal certification through George Mason University. Fun fact, I'm actually related to George Mason, the fourth on my mother's side of the family.
What'd you do when you found that out?
Well, I was 14 years old
when
I found out about that. And my mother pulled out a copy of the family tree and said, well, you look all the way back, here in the 1700s, here's George Mason the fourth, and, you and I are both related to him. So that was pretty neat to learn about that. And where I live in Charlottesville, there's actually a marker dedicated to George Mason's father, who went with the British royal governor Spotswood through the Blue Ridge Mountains back in 1716 to explore the western side of Virginia. And they called themselves the Knights of the Golden Horseshoe because Governor Spotswood awarded them these little golden horseshoes to every member of the expedition. So if you go to the Shenandoah National Park, right next to the park sign, you'll see a pyramid, and then there's a Virginia historical marker sign, and they're both in tribute to the Knights of the Golden Horseshoe. And if you look at the pyramid, my relative's name, George Mason's father, is inscribed on that pyramid with other folks in there.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Got a little bit of history to you.
Yeah. And I do also run, so in addition to my business, I run HamiltonHistoricalRecords.com. That's, so that's another passion of mine. I've been running that for about as long as I've been running this legal business. And the reason why I started a history website, because I just wanted to have something out there about my various travels, but also just as a record of various places I've visited. And, for example, actually, I brought this in. This is the historic Finn Castle. I was working here last week, and there's a lot of great historical sites over there in Botetourt County. And what was interesting, when I was working over there, the courthouse, which is on the top of the flyer, is the circuit court, was actually being demolished. And that was a surprise. I was like, wow. I didn't know that they were planning on demolishing this courthouse.
Yeah, what are they doing?
Well, I looked into the history of it. I talked to the Historical Society. I'm like, well, why did they come to this decision? So that courthouse, they actually based it off some designs from Thomas Jefferson. It was built in 1845, and it lasted for 130 years until it burnt down in 1970. And then they built a replica of the courthouse, which they are currently demolishing to this day. And the replica lasted for 50 years. It was built in 1975. And, what happened is that it got a lot of mold. The ceiling was partially collapsing. So there was a lot of structural issues with that courthouse. And they decided to demolish it and to create a new one. So the new one's supposed to have the facade similar to what the 1845 courthouse looks like, which is a Jeffersonian style. And but they're going to expand the back end, so they're going to add multiple rooms. I think they're going to raise it up. There's going to be a story taller. What happens is the sheriffs, they used to have to transport the criminals, or people who have been accused of various crimes to the front of the courthouse. So they're going to have a back entrance, so that way instead of going, through the general public to transport these folks, they can go in the back of the courthouse and bring them to court. So there'll be some benefits to the new courthouse once it's up and erected.
That makes sense.
And it was neat because during my lunch break, there's a rooftop bar across the street from the courthouse. So I got to watch some of the demolition taking place while enjoying lunch.
That had to have been fun.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
You don't get to do that every day.
No, not at all.
Yeah. And another thing I'll mention too is that in King George County, which is, further east of here, they actually stopped using their courthouse, and they actually opened up their new one 2 months ago. But they didn't demolish the old one. Instead, they just built a new courthouse a mile away from the old one that they have. So every county, they do things differently.
Okay. I was going to ask you if courthouses are kind of recognized as monuments, because it's a lot of stuff that kind of goes on in there, or is it just kind of something that can be just taken down or restructured?
Well, it's really up to your county board of supervisors or, city council if the courthouse is within the city.
Yeah.
They have the main authority on that.
I can see whatever type of, process or hearing that might take place that is like super important out of nowhere that just happens to be like pretty influential throughout, either the state or the county or whatever. They'll be like, yeah, maybe this building does need to stay, but I don't know how that stuff works. But
yeah, in my personal opinion, for the Botetourt County Courthouse, it's a very rural area. I'm like, wow, that must be a lot of money to tear it down and to build a new one. They should have considered, just remodeling the existing one. Probably would have cost less,
probably
for the residents there. But that's just my personal opinion on that. But what was interesting when I was there, they had these large wooden panels in the demolition area. And it was covering the former monument dedicated to the Confederate veterans. Mm-hmm. And so they didn't want to relocate that monument, so they boarded it up to protect it from all the Durbus, concrete, and everything else that was falling off the building.
Okay, wow. I did want to ask you real quick, when it just comes to what you do, if there's both civilians or like from a business perspective, what are some things that you see that people just maybe need to do their homework a little bit more, maybe just don't understand when they're going into a hearing?
Well, that's a great question. Well, there's a lot of folks, who I've encountered, and if I'm serving them like a subpoena or a summons, some of them say that, I've never been to court before. I don't know what to do from here. I'm like, well, if there's a summons, you generally have 30 days to file what's called an answer. So you can contest the allegations that are being laid against you as a defendant. So the answer is what you're contesting and what you file with the clerk of the court in a general district court or in the United States District Court if it's a federal case. And when it comes to a subpoena, I think it's easier to deal with a subpoena than the summons, because with a subpoena, you don't always have to show up to court. Sometimes you're told to go to a law firm and say, we're going to take your deposition at the law firm, or we're going to do it over Zoom. So you don't even have to leave your home. You can just do a Zoom call with an attorney for the deposition. And sometimes, like the doctors, they have to send emails, usually in PDF file, of the various medical records pertaining like car accident cases. Okay. And sometimes if it's like a small like chiropractic firm and like if they've never been subpoenaed before, and I was just kind of briefly explain, well, they're just kind of looking for these records, and this is what's listed, and you just got to email it by this time, because there's always a deadline of when they need the records, because it has to be before the court hearing.
Gotcha. Okay. And is there anything when it comes to like a business or maybe just in general, like, do you guys have to kind of keep in touch with like economic development going on in the just the community, and like that kind of can give you a good kind of thought process on how like new laws might come into about?
Well, one thing that's been discussed, because I deal with the foreclosure sale side of things,
Mm-hmm.
so we do follow the market trends, and we're like, okay, well,
Okay.
if there's a lot of economic stressors, we may be facing more foreclosures, and things may get busier. Now, last year, there's some people I worked with who are predicting that the foreclosure rate was going to go higher in 2025. I was going with, well, it's kind of wait and see. There's going to be a lot of changes in the economy. And fortunately, we haven't been seeing that higher rate of foreclosures. I think, the economy, we're seeing some improvements with the economy. Of course, tariffs took a hit in April, but now we're going back up on the rise from the initial shock of the tariffs. But that mainly affects the foreclosure side of things. But regardless of whether we're in a good economic state or if we're in a recession, I mean, the legal side it's always busy. They always need summons, always need subpoenas being delivered, really no matter what, because court cases they're always ongoing. Now, the only exception to that, was back in 2020. I was living in California at the time, and courthouses were closed. So the Supreme Court of California ordered a lot of courthouses to be closed. So, and at the time, it was actually really tough because I lost probably 95% of my business at that time. Because there was no new civil suits being filed. You couldn't, there's no probate court filings going through, and they were only allowing for new protective orders to be filed. So there was a lot of contractors that I'd worked with who were laid off, and various contractors that I had been working with from my business said, like, we just don't have work because we don't have new filings going through.
Yeah.
And that year I decided to go on a 3-month road trip. Actually, I drove from Santa Cruz, California, with my girlfriend, and we went up north to like Lassen National Park. Really beautiful. There's like active volcanic. They have like these mud flaps and also other cool stuff you can see up there. It's up in the mountains, and to Mount Shasta, and then to Crater Lake in Oregon. And we went to the Battle of Little Bighorn in Montana.
Oh, yeah.
And another significant historical site where General Custer was killed. And actually, when we went to Fort Abraham Lincoln, which is in North Dakota, and that's the last home where General Custer lived in before he was killed in that battle.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So that's something you can check out. And of course, we got to see Crazy Horse monuments, and we went to South Dakota, checked out some of the national parks down there. Mount Rushmore, that was really fascinating to see. And we stayed a few days in Chicago, and then we drove all the way down to Florida. This is where her family lives. So it was a long trip.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And gas was cheap at the time because not many people were on the road.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And it was a lot of fun. But so I made the decision, instead of moving back to California after this 3-month road trip, I'm going to reestablish myself in Virginia. And it was tough the first couple of years, because even though I grew up in Virginia, there was a lot of folks, I guess when you move to another state, your name just kind of disappears in a way. And they're like, oh, okay, we haven't heard of him. We don't know if he's reliable. But I kind of established myself, in not only do I use the National Association of Professional Process Servers, but word of mouth. I've had attorneys who've recommended me to other attorneys, and they're happy with my business and the expediency of what we do. And I'm very detail oriented, so I always give detailed notes. I always take photographs, even some of the time GPS photographs, to show I was here at the specific time, so that way folks know that like I was there. And unfortunately, there are cases when there are process servers, and I just hear this from other business owners, that they say that they were at a certain place but they were not, And, that can be problematic, especially because these are legal documents that are being put forth. And you have to sign, like I have to sign, and my court runners and my legal process servers, who work for me as contractors, they have to sign affidavits of service. So showing I was here at this specific time, serving, this document. And then we have affidavits of non-service, which means we attempted, there was no answer at the door, or if it's a bad address because they moved to another state or just moved to another city. And then I just said, per this person, it's a bad address.
Okay. And then they just have to go through their state that they moved to, or does that even matter anymore?
Yeah. Well, if it's an area where I cover, I try to cover it. But if, let's say, it gets sent to like the Florida or California, I'm like, well, they'll have to contact another, process server company to get that job done.
Okay. And you got a good team to back you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, how can people get in contact with you?
Well, they can reach out to me directly on my cell phone, which is 571-455-5312. It's a call or text on that number. I answer the both. And email, which is Hamilton Legal Services Virginia @gmail.com. Also have a Facebook page. I have a website, which is Hamilton Legal Services LLC.com. There's multiple ways to get in touch.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming. It was nice to meet you. And you have a good rest of your day, okay?
Yeah, pleasure to meet you as well.
Everyone who's coming in, and I'll see you too later, Debbie. Anyone who's joining us, make sure to follow us as well on Facebook and Spotify. And you can check on all of the events that we've got going on our Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. So check us out. Enjoy the rest of your day, guys. Thanks for joining.